She never said this before, not because the words were not inside her, but because some truths wait until the world is ready to hear them, and some messages wait until a certain kind of person is listening. Imagine a mother who has watched a child grow from a quiet, curious boy into one of the most talked about figures on the planet. Imagine the weight of that journey, the pride, the fear, the long nights, the moments of doubt that never make the headlines. This is not a message about fame or money or power. This is a message about becoming, about endurance, about the unseen foundation beneath extraordinary lives. When you look at a name that fills news articles and screens, you rarely think of the hands that first held that life. The voice that first whispered encouragement, the silent prayers offered when no one else was watching. A mother sees the beginning long before the world sees the success. She sees the fragile stages, the awkward seasons, the moments when giving up would have been easy. And that is why, when a mother speaks after years of silence, the message carries a different kind of weight. It is not polished for applause. It is not shaped for popularity. It comes from memory, from love, from truth earned over decades. She never said this before because for a long time, the world preferred simple stories. Genius. Luck. Overnight success. But life is never that simple. Behind every person who changes industries or challenges systems, there is a long process of being misunderstood, doubted, and even rejected. A mother remembers the days when belief was the only fuel. She remembers the moments when encouragement mattered more than advice, when listening mattered more than correcting. She remembers how many times she had to choose faith over fear. This message is emotional because it is not about achievement, it is about cost. It is about what it takes to keep going when the path you are walking has no clear map. It is about watching someone you love take risks that scare you, not because you doubt them, but because you understand how unforgiving the world can be. A mother's heart does not harden with success, it becomes more tender. The higher the climb, the deeper the concern. The louder the applause, the more she listens for the quiet places where her child might still feel alone. She would say that greatness does not begin with confidence. It begins with curiosity. Long before the world calls someone bold, they are simply asking questions no one else is asking. They are taking things apart not to destroy them, but to understand them. A mother notices these small signs early. She sees a child lost in thought, more interested in ideas than approval. She sees a spark that does not fit neatly into expectations. And she learns, often through trial and error, that her role is not to dim that spark for safety, but to protect it while it grows. There were times when the path looked unreasonable. Times when stability seemed like the wiser choice. Times when the future felt uncertain and the present felt heavy. A mother would admit that she did not always understand every decision. Love does not require full understanding, it requires presence. It requires standing near someone even when their dreams seem too large for the room. It requires resisting the urge to say be realistic when what the soul needs is permission to imagine. She never said this before because vulnerability is not something the world expects from strength. But strength, in its truest form, is the willingness to feel deeply, to care deeply, to hope deeply. A mother feels every failure as sharply as every success. She feels the criticism, the mockery, the misinterpretations, even when she pretends not to. And yet, she continues to believe, because belief is what mothers do when logic runs out. This message is also for you, even if you think your life looks nothing like his. A mother would tell you that the early stages of any meaningful journey often look unimpressive from the outside. They look like confusion, like delay, like being out of place. She would tell you that if you feel misunderstood, it does not mean you are wrong. It may simply mean you are early. Growth rarely announces itself. It happens quietly, often painfully, before it ever becomes visible. She would speak about resilience, not as a dramatic trait, but as a series of small choices. Getting up again. Asking another question. Trying one more time. A mother watches these moments closely. She sees how character is built not in victories, but in responses to setbacks. She knows that what lasts is not brilliance alone, but persistence guided by purpose. There is an emotional honesty in admitting that fear never fully disappears. Even at the highest levels of achievement, fear changes shape but remains present. A mother would say that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision not to let fear make your choices. She would say that she learned this by watching, by worrying, by trusting, and by letting go again and again. She might tell you that the world will try to label you quickly. Genius, failure, visionary, problem. These labels are convenient, but they are never complete. A mother knows the complexity behind a single name. She knows the contradictions, the softness behind the intensity, the doubts behind the determination. And she would remind you not to let the world's labels limit your own understanding of who you are becoming. She never said this before because some lessons cannot be taught early. They must be lived first. They must be proven through time. One of those lessons is that approval is fleeting, but integrity endures. Trends change. Opinions shift. What remains is the quiet knowledge that you stayed true to what you believed mattered. A mother would say that this inner alignment is worth more than any external recognition. This emotional message would also speak about loneliness. Not the kind that comes from being unloved, but the kind that comes from walking a path few understand. Innovation can be isolating. Leadership can be heavy. Being different can be exhausting. A mother would acknowledge this without trying to fix it. She would simply say, "You are not weak for feeling this way. You are human." And feeling deeply is not a flaw, it is often the source of your strength. She would reflect on patience. On seasons where progress felt invisible. On waiting without knowing how long the wait would last. A mother learns patience not from ease, but from necessity. She would tell you that some processes cannot be rushed, no matter how urgent the dream feels. Roots grow in darkness before anything breaks the surface. And strong roots are what keep tall structures standing when the storms come. She never said this before because the world often listens for noise, not nuance. But this message is nuanced. It is about balance. About learning when to push and when to pause. About knowing that rest is not weakness, and reflection is not wasted time. A mother understands rhythms intuitively. She knows that constant pressure breaks even the strongest materials. She would urge you to care for the inner life as fiercely as you pursue the outer goals. This message carries gratitude as well. Gratitude for teachers, for critics, for obstacles that refined rather than destroyed. A mother sees how challenges shape perspective. She sees how adversity can either harden or deepen a person. And she would say that the difference lies in whether you allow hardship to make you bitter or better. She would also speak about responsibility. About the weight that comes with influence. About remembering the human impact behind big ideas. A mother never forgets the value of empathy. She would remind you that progress without compassion is incomplete. That intelligence without kindness eventually collapses under its own weight. She never said this before because saying it now means trusting the listener. Trusting that you can hear encouragement without turning it into pressure. Trusting that you can receive inspiration without comparison. This is not a message telling you to be like someone else. It is a message inviting you to be fully yourself, even if that self does not fit neatly into existing boxes. In her emotional honesty, she would admit that letting go is one of the hardest parts of motherhood. Letting someone face consequences. Letting them make mistakes. Letting them grow beyond your protection. And yet, she would say that this letting go is also an act of faith. Faith that what was planted early will continue to guide. Even when distance grows, she would talk about love not as something that shields from pain, but as something that provides strength to endure it. Love does not remove obstacles, it gives meaning to the effort. A mother's love is not loud, but it is relentless. It shows up in consistency, in belief that does not waver with circumstances. She never said this before because perhaps now, more than ever, the world needs reminders of the human side of ambition. The tenderness behind determination. The vulnerability behind resilience. This message is not about celebrating a name, it is about honoring the process that shapes a life, and if she were to end this message, it would not be with advice, but with reassurance. Reassurance that you are allowed to grow at your own pace. That your path does not need to make sense to everyone. that the doubts you feel do not cancel the purpose you carry. She would say that if you are still asking questions, still trying, still caring, then you are not behind. You are becoming. She never said this before, but now you have heard it. Not as a declaration of success, but as a quiet affirmation of the journey. A reminder that behind every extraordinary outcome is an ordinary human story, filled with fear, hope, love, and perseverance. And perhaps the most emotional part of all is this simple truth. She would continue by saying that one of the hardest lessons she learned as a mother was accepting that protection has limits. You can guide, you can advise, you can pray, you can hope, but you cannot live another person's life for them. Watching someone you love step into uncertainty requires a special kind of courage, the kind that stays quiet and steady rather than dramatic. She would admit there were moments when fear spoke louder than faith, moments when she wondered if the risks were too high, the sacrifices too great. But love teaches you to trust not only the world, but the strength you see forming in the person you raised. She never said this before because it reveals how often growth is mistaken for recklessness. When someone chooses a path that does not follow tradition, it unsettles people. It unsettles families, communities, systems. A mother feels that tension deeply. She feels the judgment, the unspoken questions, the raised eyebrows. Yet she also sees something others cannot see yet, a sense of direction that does not rely on approval. She would tell you that sometimes the most responsible thing you can do is listen to a calling that only you can hear. She would talk about how early criticism can shape a person in two ways. It can shrink them, or it can sharpen them. A mother watches closely to see which way it goes. She remembers moments when words hurt, when rejection stung, when misunderstanding felt personal. She remembers offering comfort without softening the truth, reminding that resilience is not built by avoiding pain, but by learning how to move through it without losing yourself. This message grows more emotional as she speaks about expectations. The world loves to attach expectations to potential. But potential is fragile. It needs space, not pressure. A mother would say that she learned to resist comparing her child to others, learned to honor a different rhythm, a different way of thinking. She would tell you that comparison is one of the fastest ways to lose clarity, because it shifts your focus from becoming to competing. She never said this before because she knows how easily inspiration can turn into burden. She would caution you not to carry someone else's story as a standard for your own worth. Every path has invisible details. Every success hides countless quiet struggles. A mother understands that what looks like confidence is often courage practiced repeatedly in private. She would speak gently about failure, not as an enemy, but as a teacher that rarely introduces itself kindly. She remembers failures that felt devastating at the time, failures that later revealed direction. A mother sees patterns over time. She sees how what once looked like a dead end became a redirection. And she would tell you not to rush the meaning out of your setbacks. Some understanding only arrives with distance. She never said this before because patience is easier to describe than to live. She would admit that waiting tested her as much as uncertainty tested her child. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for stability. Waiting for reassurance that the sacrifices mattered. But she would say that waiting is not empty time. It is time where character settles, where motives become clear, where endurance is quietly strengthened. Her message would touch on identity. On the danger of tying self-worth too tightly to outcomes. A mother knows that applause can be intoxicating and criticism can be crushing if identity is built on either. She would remind you that who you are must be rooted deeper than what you achieve. Titles fade. Headlines move on. But values, once formed, continue to guide long after attention shifts elsewhere. She never said this before because it involves acknowledging vulnerability in a world that rewards certainty. She would say there were times she worried not about failure, but about success. About what success demands, what it takes, what it costs emotionally. She would say that ambition must be balanced with humanity, or it begins to hollow you out. A mother sees the importance of staying connected to simple joys, ordinary moments, grounding relationships. She would also speak about responsibility to oneself. About knowing when to rest, when to step back, when to say no. She would say that burnout is not a badge of honor, and exhaustion is not proof of dedication. A mother learns to read signs of weariness long before collapse. She would urge you to listen to your inner signals with the same seriousness you give to external goals. She never said this before because it requires honesty about fear of loss. The higher someone rises, the more visible they become, and visibility attracts both admiration and attack. A mother feels this tension constantly. She would say that resilience must include emotional boundaries, the ability to hear feedback without absorbing every voice. Not every opinion deserves a place in your inner world. Her message would soften as she talks about gratitude. About remembering beginnings. About honoring those who stood beside you when progress was slow and recognition absent. A mother values loyalty deeply. She sees how easy it is to forget early supporters when life accelerates. She would remind you that humility is not thinking less of yourself, but remembering that you did not walk alone. She never said this before because she trusts that now, the listener can handle complexity. That you can understand encouragement without illusion. She would say that meaningful work often demands sacrifices that no one applauds. Missed comforts. Long stretches of uncertainty. Emotional weight carried quietly. But she would also say that fulfillment does not come from ease. It comes from alignment with what feels true. She would return again to love, not as sentiment, but as endurance. Love that remains steady through change. Love that adapts without disappearing. A mother's love evolves as the child grows, shifting from protection to respect, from guidance to trust. She would say that this evolution is painful, but necessary. She never said this before because perhaps now the message is not just about one life, but about many lives listening. She would want you to hear that being different is not a flaw to correct, but a signal to understand yourself more deeply. That your questions are not distractions, but invitations to explore. That your doubts do not disqualify you. They refine you, and she would pause here, not to end, but to let the weight of these words settle. Because some messages are not meant to rush past you. They are meant to sit quietly, to echo later, when you face your own moments of uncertainty, your own decisions that feel lonely, your own dreams that feel too large to explain. She would finish by saying that if she could offer one truth without embellishment, it would be this: the journey never becomes easy, it simply becomes more honest. Over time, illusions fall away. You stop chasing validation and start seeking clarity. You stop asking whether others approve and start asking whether your life feels aligned. A mother notices this shift before the world does. She sees when effort becomes intention, when noise gives way to focus. She never said this before because endings are difficult for mothers. An ending sounds like separation, and love resists separation. But this is not an ending, it is a release. A release of control. A release of fear. A release of the need to constantly explain or defend the path taken. She would say that true maturity is learning to stand calmly in your choices without needing permission. Her voice would soften as she speaks about forgiveness. Forgiveness for past mistakes. Forgiveness for missed moments. Forgiveness for the times you were too hard on yourself because you thought strength meant never breaking. A mother knows that self-compassion is not weakness, it is repair. It is how you continue without carrying unnecessary weight. She would urge you to be as patient with yourself as you are ambitious. She never said this before because it requires acknowledging that love does not guarantee comfort. Sometimes love calls you forward instead of holding you back. Sometimes it encourages distance instead of closeness, growth instead of safety. A mother would say that her deepest hope was never success in the world's eyes, but wholeness in the soul. Achievement without inner peace is an empty victory. She would speak one last time about fear, not as an enemy, but as a signal. Fear points to where something matters. It shows you where your heart is invested. A mother would say that instead of running from fear, you can learn from it. Ask what it is protecting. Ask what it is revealing. Fear, when understood, becomes a guide rather than a prison. She never said this before because it involves trust in the listener. Trust that you will not romanticize struggle or rush the process. She would say that life unfolds in seasons, and each season has its own wisdom. There are times to push and times to wait. Times to speak and times to listen. Ignoring these rhythms leads to exhaustion, honoring them leads to sustainability. Her final words would be about presence. About being where you are, fully. Not mentally racing ahead to outcomes, not living in regret over what has passed. A mother understands presence deeply, because so much of motherhood is made of ordinary moments that only reveal their value later. She would remind you that meaning is often hidden in the everyday, not just the extraordinary. She never said this before because saying it now means stepping back completely. Trusting that the foundation laid will hold. Trusting that values will guide when advice is no longer needed. Trusting that love does not end when guidance ends. It simply changes form, and if she could leave you with one quiet reassurance, it would be this: you do not need to prove your worth through constant achievement. You were worthy long before anyone noticed what you could do. Your value is not created by success, it is revealed through how you live, how you treat others, how you remain human in a demanding world. She never said this before, but now the message is complete. Not as a declaration of arrival, but as a reminder of continuity. Life continues to unfold. Growth continues to ask questions. Love continues to adapt. And somewhere, often unseen, belief continues to hold steady, not because the outcome is guaranteed, but because the journey itself is worth honoring.